Super Mario 64 is one of the most iconic video games of all time. With Princess Peach trapped inside her own castle, Mario needs to collect 70 out of 120 Power Stars to take down Bowser's barriers and defeat King Koopa. Over the years, clever players discovered that there are ways to take down these barriers other than collecting all those stars. Here's how a team of dedicated tool-assisted speedrunners managed to find a way to beat Super Mario 64 in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Before we go on, if you don't know what a tool-assisted speedrun is, please watch the suggested video in the upper right corner. It will cover all the basic things you should know before understanding this speedrun. Okay, so first, why does Mario go over to the water instead of entering the castle? The answer is the result of 2 decades of optimization. The castle is divided in 3 levels: the ground level, the basement, and upstairs. To progress to a new section of the castle, you need to get a key by fighting Bowser in the previous section. The basement key is found behind a star door that requires 8 stars to open. To go upstairs, you need to get a second key from Bowser, this time after getting 30 stars to open the door, plus 1 extra to unlock the level. You then need to collect 50 stars to open another star door, and to reach the final Bowser fight, you need to collect 70 stars. Otherwise, the door will still let you in, but the staircase leading to the final Bowser stage will be infinite. At first, the fastest known way to beat the game was to collect 70 stars in both keys, but it was discovered that you could skip the 50 and 70 star door requirements using a trick we'll get to in a minute. This meant that the fastest way now involved getting 31 stars to get the second key and skipping the upstairs section entirely. It was then found that you could bypass the 30 star door using Nips the Rabbit, which appears after you've collected 15 stars, so the requirement went down to 16. Next, it was found that you could skip the 8 star door and get the first key with 0 stars, but it didn't help that much since you still needed 15 for Mips to appear. Until a new trick was found that let you skip the 30 star door without Mips, which lowered the star requirement to 1. Later, a variation of this trick let you skip both the 30 star door and the Dire Dire Duck star, and the requirement was brought down to 0. Because these 3 castle levels are in separate maps entirely, there was little hope for any major improvement on the speedrun route. But it turns out that there is another way to the basement: the moat door. This underwater door leads directly into the basement of the castle, so if Mario manages to enter this door from the outside, he will enter the basement without a key and without any stars. The caveat is that Mario can't open doors underwater. To make this door accessible, the water needs to be drained from the inside first, which means the basement can't be accessed right away. However, there is a way to open a door underwater, and this is what we're gonna see here. Let's look at this step by step. Mario does a long jump, but immediately reverses his direction to go backwards. This sets up a trick called backwards long jumping, or BLJ for short. When Mario long jumps backwards, the game gives him a little bit of extra speed at the start of his jump. How much extra speed? Well, only half of his current negative speed minus a little bit of speed loss for the time he was on the ground. As you can see, Mario quickly loses that speed and returns to about negative 15 speed. By the way, here's a sense of scale. 1 unit of speed means that Mario will travel 1 unit of distance in 1 frame. This is 1 unit of distance, which is roughly equivalent to about 1 centimeter, assuming that Mario is human-sized. In this case, Mario moving at negative 15 speed means that he will travel by 15 units backwards on each frame. However, if Mario is able to land immediately after jumping, he can long jump again and get another small bit of speed. This time half of negative 23 speed, so he gets to negative 33. If he does it again, he gets half of negative 33 this time, which brings him up to negative 49 speed. This quickly spirals out of control as each consecutive jump multiplies his backward speed by 1.5 minus a negligible speed loss. After a while, Mario's speed is so large that he reaches the vanish cap under the moat entrance in a single frame. You might have noticed the 4 pauses here. This is called pause buffering, and it can be helpful while doing a BLJ. Since Super Mario 64 runs at 30 frames per second, the fastest a button can be pressed is 15 times per second. When pausing the game, Mario's universe and its physics stop advancing in time, but the game still registers buttons being pressed or released. Here's what happens. Mario jumps and the game is paused at the same time. There is 1 frame needed to release start, and then 1 frame to press it again. On the next frame, the game is still paused and you can use it to release start. On the frame after, the game is unpaused and you can jump and pause again. This is what it looks like with the pausing time removed. As you can see, Mario is able to jump 30 times per second according to the game's physics without actually pressing the A button that fast. This helps generate all the speed required for this trick in the tight space it can be performed in at the cost of a little bit of time spent pausing the game. You might also have noticed how Mario seems stuck in place towards the end of his BLJ. This is because at this point, the bridge is preventing him from moving inside of it. However, by the time he gains enough speed to break out of this spot, he has way more than enough to overshoot the bridge in a single frame. So why doesn't he break out of it sooner? The reason is pretty simple. When processing Mario's movement, the game subdivides the movement in 4 steps, which we'll call quarter steps. As Mario is moving, the game checks if there's an obstacle on each quarter step of his movement. As long as nothing is in the way, Mario will keep being moved on each quarter step. However, if he's about to move into a ceiling, the quarter step will be cancelled and he will stay in place. In other words, if Mario is about to move into a ceiling, he will be moved up to the last valid quarter step of his movement. Here's an example. On the first quarter step, the game is trying to put Mario inside the ceiling that makes up the underside of the bridge. Because Mario can't be inside of a ceiling, the game cancels his movement for that quarter step. The same process happens again on the second, on the third, and on the fourth quarter steps. At the end of the frame, although Mario has negative 1800 speed, he ended up not moving at all. But this interaction doesn't change his speed. On the next frame, even though he has negative 2700 speed now, the same problem occurs. Each quarter step, the game attempts to move him into the ceiling, which it can't, so Mario stays in place. This means that to break out of this spot at this angle, Mario needs to have enough speed so that his first quarter step is past the bridge, which means he needs to have enough speed to cover 4 times that distance in a single frame. Another way to break out of this spot is to change his angle until it doesn't put him into a ceiling, or in this case, to jump down into the moat. Finally, you may wonder how Mario got from all the way up here to all the way down here in a single frame using a jump. First, because Mario has negative 6150 speed by now, he's able to cross that distance in a single frame horizontally. But what about vertically? How can a jump make Mario move down by nearly 1500 units in a single frame? Well, to answer that, let's look at how Mario jumps. When you press A, the game will make Mario jump. That jump gives Mario an initial vertical speed, and gravity subtracts 4 speed on each subsequent frame until Mario lands or until he reaches his terminal velocity of 75 units downwards. This initial speed varies depending on the type of jump. For a single jump like the one used here, the initial speed is a constant value of 42 plus 1/4 of his horizontal speed. For a double jump, that constant is 52 instead. This means that the faster Mario is moving, the higher he jumps by a small amount. However, this formula also applies if Mario's horizontal speed is negative. If Mario has negative speed, then his initial jump speed will be lower than 42. If Mario has enough negative speed, his jumps will also have negative speed. This is called a negative jump. In this case, Mario's initial jump speed is 42 plus negative 6154 divided by 4, or negative 1497. This negative vertical speed means that his quarter step movement puts him under the bridge instead of inside of it, so Mario moves unobstructed for the full duration of the frame. This puts him right on the loading zone that leads to Vanish Cap under the moat, which is normally only accessible when the water has been drained. At this point, since Mario is underwater, something should happen on the next frame. At the start of each frame, before Mario starts moving, the game checks if he's colliding with anything like walls, water, or enemies. Once the game detects that he has entered water, it will attempt to place him at the surface in a swimming state. However, the game handles the interaction with the loading trigger before the interaction with water, so the loading zone is triggered first and Mario never gets to enter water. Here, Mario should have taken damage from this long fall, but thanks to hitting this wall, he reset the falling distance and avoids taking damage. You may think that the movement that led us here wasn't quite optimal, and in fact you would be correct. But because this next BLJ requires the elevator platform to be in a specific spot, all that matters is that we get there on time. The reason Mario is able to start another BLJ on the elevator is because the game doesn't consider the momentum of a platform Mario is on when he jumps. Long jumping from a platform moving upwards has interesting results. Mario will start moving up, but so will the platform. After a frame, Mario moved up less than the platform has, so he snapped back up on the platform's floor and he lands from his jump immediately. These are the perfect conditions for a BLJ to happen. Behind this wall is out of bounds, so with negative speed, the game is trying to move Mario into a place that is out of bounds. This works mostly the same way as moving into a ceiling, so Mario is kept in place while he keeps building up speed. Here, the game is paused to change camera settings. You can press R to switch between two camera modes, Lakitu Cam and Mario Cam. Changing the camera setting enables you to replace Mario Cam with Fixed Cam, which will hold the camera in place while it stays focused on Mario as long as you hold the R button. The reason for this change will make more sense soon. The reason why this couldn't be done during pause buffering a BLJ is because for the exit course and camera options to be available, the game needs to be paused while Mario is in the level and while he's doing one of 39 specific actions, and long jumping is not one of them. Now what happens here? Well, this BLJ was much longer than the first one. If you thought negative 6,154 speed was a lot, hold on to something because you're not ready for this. Here, Mario keeps building up speed until it reaches negative 3.4 million. With that amount of speed, he's actually able to move somewhere. I won't explain where exactly just yet, but don't worry. For now, let's just say Mario is very far away. In fact, he's 3 million units away, or about 168 times the size of the map. What matters here is that the elevator Mario was on just one frame earlier has started rotating. Because of an oversight in the game's code, under specific conditions, rotating platforms can affect Mario for one extra frame after he's no longer on them. Now, a platform rotating by 2.8 degrees usually has no noticeable impact, but magnify it over 3 million units of distance and suddenly those 2.8 degrees definitely matter. In fact, they matter so much that in one frame, Mario instantly gets warped below the death barrier, which in this stage doesn't kill him but instead kicks him back out into the castle ground, specifically here. The reason why this is useful is that Mario's speed has two components, a horizontal speed and a sliding speed. The horizontal speed is used for most movement and the sliding speed is used when sliding. Both speeds are set at the same value most of the time, but some scenarios will update Mario's horizontal speed without updating his sliding speed. Being underwater is one of those scenarios. Therefore, while Mario is swimming around, he keeps whatever sliding speed he had entering the water, which in this case is 2,965,712. And this is where the magic happens. Okay, so how does this part work? To answer that, we need to talk about overflow jumps. Oh, and parallel universes. In Super Mario 64, Mario's position can be in any area of 3D space. However, when the game checks to see if Mario has a floor under him, it converts that position into an integer that can range from negative 32,768 to positive 32,767. If Mario's position is beyond this range, then this conversion overflows and loops back around, which means that Mario's real position and his floor detection position become disjointed. If Mario's floor detection position happens to be in a place where there's ground to stand on, then he can stand on that ground. So, for all intents and purposes, there is a copy of the map on each multiple of 65,536 units that Mario can sort of interact with. I say sort of because only the floor detection is handled this way, so there are no walls, objects, or textures out there. These incomplete copies of the map are called parallel universes, or PUs for short. This is a to-scale diagram of parallel universes. As you can see, most of the space is out of bounds and so it cannot be accessed. This means that navigating PUs requires a very specific speed in order to actually work. But remember, when attempting to move Mario, the game divides his movement into 4 quarter steps. For Mario to actually move into a PU, he needs to have a large enough speed that even the first quarter step is in a PU, which means he needs to be able to move up to a multiple of 4 PUs over. The speed required to perform a PU movement is called the sinking speed. Small deviations to the sinking speed and angle will still move Mario to a PU, but they will also move him relatively to the main map. Now remember what happens if Mario's position is valid after one quarter step, but becomes invalid after the next one. He is moved up to but not beyond the last valid quarter step of his movement. This means that if the first quarter steps of Mario's movement line up with a PU, but at some point they stop lining up, Mario will end up moving into a PU but not by a multiple of 4. So with this in mind, where did Mario end up when he was 3 million units away in the Vanish Cap course? Well, it turns out that he was in a parallel universe. Mario ends up here, 32 PUs away in each direction. But his floor detection position, which we'll call his relative position from now on, barely moved. Since the game still detects him as being on the elevator, he can stand where he is for one frame before the game detects that he's too far for the platform to be solid. Thankfully, Mario only needs to be on the PU elevator for that one frame. At this point, the elevator starts rotating and a 2.8 degree rotation is applied over a distance of 32 PUs, warping Mario down under the death barrier, which triggers immediately and kicks him out of the stage. So now, with 2.9 million speed up his sleeve, Mario is ready to embark on his magical journey into parallel universes. Let's go through it step by step to understand what happens and why. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, the camera is set to fixed. That is because the Nintendo 64 console crashes if the camera tries to follow Mario into a PU. Fixing the camera onto the main map gets around this limitation, which allows the run to be played back on a real console with no issues. So to help visualizing everything, we'll use 4 different screens. The actual view, which won't be very useful because the camera is fixed. The relative view, which will follow Mario while making PUs visible using a camera hack. The relative map, which will show where Mario's relative position is, or in other words, where Mario's location inside of the PU relates on a map. And finally, the PU map, which shows where Mario actually is on a map that spans PU distances. The PU map is intentionally not to scale to make it easier to see. So the first movement we see is Mario going 3 PUs up and to the right, followed by another movement of 2 PUs down and 11 to the right. At this point, his relative position is on the beach next to the cannon, but he's actually about 1 million units away from the main map. From there, Mario pivots in place to adjust his angle and prepare for his next move. Here, Mario jumps. This has 2 major effects. The first one is actually quite simple. When moving at high speeds, Mario's single and double jumps slow him down by 20%. This means that if he has a horizontal speed of 100 and he jumps, he will lose 1/5 of that speed and continue with 80 speed. Here, he goes from 2.9 million to 2.3 million, but the principle is the same. The second effect is a bit trickier. Remember the negative jump from earlier? Well, the same principle applies here. With a high negative speed, jumping causes Mario to move down instead of up. However, we're not talking about negative 6,000 speed here, but negative 2.9 million. What happens is that Mario inherits 1/4 of that ludicrous speed, or 736,000 speed headed down. This is more than enough to reach a parallel universe, but this time vertically. So what happens when Mario enters a vertical parallel universe, or VPU? Well, it turns out things behave a bit differently here. When Mario's next quarter step position is in a VPU, again the game converts his vertical position, which we'll call his Y position, into a number between negative 32,000 and positive 32,000, and it overflows just like for horizontal PUs. Then it tries to find the closest floor below Mario. One thing to note is that Mario's exact coordinates are calculated at a point between his feet, so his Y position is at the bottom of Mario's model. To make it so Mario could climb stairs and go up slopes, this floor check actually starts 78 units above Mario's Y position. Once the game found the highest floor that meets this condition, it compares the floor's height with Mario's Y position. But this time, Mario's real Y position is used, not his relative position. Obviously, Mario's real Y position is below the floor, even if his relative position is above it. When the game runs into this scenario, it's usually because the floor is between Mario's position and the point 78 units above it, which means that he's going up a slope or a flight of stairs. So the game simply snaps Mario's Y position up to match the floor's position. Since the floor's position is within the real map, Mario is instantly snapped out of the VPU back onto the horizontal PU grid. This is called an overflow jump. It all happens inside of a single frame, so there's no moment where Mario is inside of the VPU. In fact, it always happens inside of a single quarter step, because for a jump to overflow into a VPU, the speed needs to be large enough to reach it in a single quarter step, and upon colliding with the ground, Mario's movement is automatically interrupted for that frame. This is exactly what happens here. On this frame, Mario has negative 2,648,000 speed in the X direction and 1,287,000 speed in the Z direction, or 40 PU speed in the negative X direction and 20 PU speed in the Z direction. After losing 20% of his speed, he goes down to 32 PU speed to the left and 16 PU speed down. This allows him to perform an overflow jump and move by 1/4 step, which is 8 PUs to the left and 4 PUs down. The final part of this entire trick is moving to the moat door. Now Mario is able to open the moat door if he walks into it. Unfortunately, the water in the moat extends well into the castle, so he can't just come at it from behind. However, if Mario manages to walk outside of water, and on the next frame walk into the door underwater, the interaction with the door will take priority over the underwater check. The only way this can be done is by coming in through a parallel universe. This would be simple if it wasn't for a couple of hurdles. First, Mario needs to be actually walking for the door interaction to happen. When going at PU speeds, this can be a bit tricky. When Mario moves between PUs, he'll start walking only if his next position happens to be where a floor is close enough to him. If the floor is below him, Mario will start falling instead. Fortunately, the moat floor is large and flat, so this doesn't pose much of a problem. The second hurdle is a bit more complex. In short, while Mario is walking with PU speed, if he doesn't complete all 4 quarter steps of his movement without encountering any collision, the game will crash due to an overflow error. Here, unfortunately, Mario's speed and position don't work out for this to be possible. In fact, because Mario is at position 390,000 on the x-axis and 194,000 on the z-axis, and his speed is negative 1.5 million on the x-axis and negative 788,000 on the z-axis, he needs to move for a single quarter step to line up with the original map, which would cause the game to crash. Thankfully, there is a clever workaround. If instead, the stick is left completely neutral, Mario will also start walking and the conditions that caused the crash are reversed. Now, the game will crash only if Mario does complete all 4 quarter steps without encountering any collision. This means that Mario can move for a single quarter step without crashing the game. However, since the stick is in a neutral position, it's impossible to change your angle at the same time. This poses an interesting problem. Usually, navigating between PUs is done by having an invalid angle until your speed decreases to the exact value you want, at which point Mario pivots into the correct angle for his next intended position to be valid. However, in this case, you can't pivot Mario into position because the stick needs to be neutral. The only thing that can be changed between 2 frames is Mario's speed. When the stick is neutral, Mario loses about 1 unit of speed per frame, which is extremely small. So for this strategy to work, this incredibly unlikely scenario needs to happen. Mario needs to have an angle so that his back is facing towards the door while being inside of a PU. His first quarter step position needs to be in a ceiling or out of bounds so that he cannot move into it. On the next frame, because his speed changed by about 1 unit, his new first quarter step position now needs to be in a valid spot so that he can now move into it. Therefore, on the first frame, Mario's first quarter step position needs to be at a point that is out of bounds, but that is within 1/4 of a unit of a point that is not only inbounds but also within this radius of the moat door. Such a scenario cannot possibly happen, right? Well, it turns out it can happen. It doesn't look like it, but there is a tiny gap between the inside and the outside of the moat door where there's no ground to stand on, so it is considered to be out of bounds. The walls have hitboxes that fill most of that gap, but because there's no inside wall here, the black space is out of bounds. By very carefully manipulating Mario's speed, angle, and position, he can be going towards a point out of bounds on one frame and inbounds on the next, but just how precise is that trick? This trick is so incredibly precise that simple control stick inputs are way too inaccurate to fine-tune the values. To get around this limitation, the camera position was manipulated. By pressing and releasing R at the waterfall, the camera is carefully positioned in a way that alters ever so slightly the angle at which it looks at Mario from millions of units away. This specific angle is perfect for the entire manipulation to line up just right. Do you see it? Okay, let me get closer. This is Mario's next intended position on the first frame, which is out of bounds, so he stays in his parallel universe. And that is Mario's new next intended position on the second frame, which is inside of the wall. So Mario is able to move, and he is in the walking animation, albeit backwards. After being pushed by the wall, he ends up in the door's radius and he's able to open it. And this is how the first Bowser fight is skipped entirely and Mario enters the castle basement without a key. Here, since Mario entered the door from the inside out, he appears outside once he's in the castle. This dark room is used during the door opening cutscene, so there is a real floor inside. However, there are no walls, so once Mario hits the inside wall, it pushes him back inside. You can also see the entering water interaction that I talked about earlier. As soon as Mario enters water, he is instantly snapped to the surface and enters a swimming state. This is called dive grinding. The way it works is quite simple. Mario is on the very edge of the platform, but he's facing away from the platform by a tiny amount. On the next frame, he is off the platform, which puts him in a falling state in which he can dive. At the same time, the joystick is held towards the platform. The frame after he dives, he moves back on the platform and so he lands from his dive. However, on the next frame, he slides off the platform again. So the cycle repeats and he can dive once more. Since diving gives Mario a flat 15 bonus speed, this quick diving and landing lets Mario accelerate much faster than usual, saving a bit of time. Here, Mario performs a weird looking wall kick. This is called a glitchy wall kick, and here's what's going on. When Mario collides with the wall hitbox, the game will push Mario to a point 50 units away perpendicular to the wall. If he goes into a corner, then he will be inside of 2 wall hitboxes at once. In that case, the game simply pushes Mario 50 units away from one wall, then 50 units from the other. But in what order? You might think that doesn't matter since it happens within the same quarter step and Mario is never actually found inside one of the walls. Well, it actually does matter. The game has a variable in memory that references which wall Mario is currently interacting with, but it only has one. As a result, the second wall's reference will overwrite the first, and so the first wall will be unreferenced. This is why in every corner between two walls, Mario can run against one of them because it was processed first and the reference was overwritten by the second collision. The other wall behaves as normal and Mario will push against it. Now, the way a glitchy wall kick happens requires a specific set of conditions. Because this wall is unreferenced, if Mario is simply in a corner between the walls, he won't be able to wall kick at all because the game will check for his angle against this wall instead, and for a wall kick to be possible, Mario needs to face within 45 degrees of the wall he wants to wall kick on. What needs to happen is that Mario needs to hit only this wall on one of the quarter steps of his movement and then hit the corner on the later quarter step. This can happen if Mario comes at the wall with a slight angle, which means that even though he can wall kick off the wall, his speed still has a component parallel to that wall. So in this case, Mario hits the wall on his first quarter step. The game pushes him back, but he was also moving towards the other wall. At this point, this is the referenced wall, and because Mario is coming at it head-on, he will bonk on it on the next frame or be able to wall kick. On the next quarter step, the same thing happens and he moves to the left a little bit more. Eventually, on the last quarter step, Mario ends up in the corner between both walls and the collision is handled with this wall first and this wall second. Now at this point, Mario is already set to be able to wall kick on the next frame, but since then the referenced wall changed. So he is able to wall kick, but off the other wall which he's nearly parallel to. When wall kicking, the wall acts like a mirror, so Mario comes off the wall with the same angle he hit it with. This is why Mario is able to wall kick, yet stay roughly in the same direction. Here, Mario performs a different type of BLJ called the side BLJ. The way it happens is similar to dive grinding. Since Mario's angle is ever so slightly off towards the lower step but his input direction is slightly towards the higher step, when jumping from the lower step he immediately lands on the higher step, but on the next frame his backward speed carries him back to the lower step where he jumps again. This cycle repeats itself every 2 frames, letting Mario gather enough backward speed so that none of his quarter steps collide with the wall. He also lands on the fence for 1 frame, which makes him go in a sliding state. This allows Mario to change his angle by a little bit in midair and have better control over where he's headed. The bounce on the ground also allows him to hit the back wall of the Bowser in the Fire Sea entrance while sliding backwards, which doesn't allow him to grab the ledge, saving a bit of time. He also completely bypassed the Dire Dire Ducks entrance. This is simply because the loading trigger is only 378 units wide and checked on every frame, so with Mario's speed being negative 386 in the X direction, thanks to very careful positioning, he's able to skip over the trigger entirely. Here, Mario suddenly warps up the pole. How is this possible? Well, contrary to popular belief, the pole itself actually has nothing to do with this trick. It actually happens because Mario can hang onto the ceiling and move around. The game tracks when Mario is under a hangable ceiling. If Mario hits an adjacent lower ceiling, the game recognizes that he hit a ceiling, but because he's under a hangable ceiling, it incorrectly assumes that Mario should hang on to that ceiling because it expects the hangable ceiling and the one he collided with to be the same. So Mario is placed at the hangable ceiling, which means he is warped up to its height, saving precious time. Here, Mario uses another elevator to BLJ and gain a ludicrous amount of negative speed. In this case, about 657,000. He uses that amount of speed to perform an overflow jump, which puts him 2 parallel universes over on this platform. This platform is conveniently at the same height as the loading zone trigger that leads to the Bowser fight. So after adjusting his angle to head back onto the main map, Mario ends up directly on the loading zone, entering the Bowser fight immediately. This BLJ looks pretty cool, but it's not only for show. It helps position Mario closer to the bomb, which saves time. The camera is set back to Mario Cam to save the game from rendering things that would make it lag. This is actually slower on emulator, but the community recently switched to timing this category's tasks on console and optimized them with the Nintendo 64 in mind. Interestingly, the basement door can be opened from the inside even without the key, but the 30-star door can't, so Mario is stuck in here. But he can enter Dire Dire Ducks and then exit the stage with the pause menu instead. Okay, let's go through this sequence step by step. We're past all the really complicated stuff now, so this would all be pretty simple. This spiral staircase has a weird property. The floor up here is very close to the ceiling below. When Mario is close enough to a ledge, he can grab the ledge and pull himself up. This interaction takes priority over the collision with the ceiling, letting him go through the ceiling entirely. When pulling himself up, Mario hits the wall. This cancels the animation of Mario pulling himself up and saves a few frames. Now, Mario sets up yet another BLJ in the stairs. This time, he only reaches about 700 speed, but it is still enough to clip through walls with careful movement. After hitting this wall, he uses C-Up, which changes the camera to first person. In first person mode while against the wall, Mario's facing angle will be directly at the wall. Since he still has backward speed, he shoots away from the wall. The first person mode is then cancelled on the next frame to regain control of Mario. Mario also kicks up the stairs. Kicking allows Mario to be airborne without the 20% speed loss that comes with the jump. Because he needs to keep as much speed as possible for the rest of this section, kicking is much more efficient. Next, Mario actually stops at the star door. The text box that tells him he doesn't have enough stars has a very useful property. Mario's speed coming into it is preserved and his facing angle can be redirected anywhere after gaining control. He does still turn around to face the door first, which is actually useful. When gaining control, Mario crouches, which puts him in a crouch slide state. In this state, sliding speed is used. Now there is a property of sliding speed that I glossed over when I talked about it earlier. Sliding speed is actually a vector with a direction and an amplitude equal to Mario's movement. Since he's now facing the door immediately before he gains control, his sliding speed is pointing this way because that's the direction he was moving in, and his horizontal speed is pointing that way because he has backward speed. This means that entering a sliding state turns what used to be backward momentum into forward momentum. Using first-person mode cancels that sliding state immediately. It puts Mario in a different state called C-Up slide, out of which he can't jump. However, he can punch. Punching brings its own set of problems though. Midway through his punch, Mario hits a wall. Normally, if Mario punches a wall, he'll lose all of his momentum and be recoiled back. The reason why it doesn't happen here is a combination of many factors we've talked about already, all coming together in the perfect way. When Mario's punching, the game takes a point 50 units in front of Mario and checks if there's a wall within 5 units of it. If Mario's facing anywhere within about 25 degrees of a wall, this check will find the wall and Mario will punch it. However, everything involved with collisions and movement happens in a very specific order. Here's how the process goes and why Mario's punch never finds the wall right in front of him. First, the game checks if Mario is colliding with a wall. He isn't, so nothing happens. Then, the game checks if Mario's punch is within 5 units of the wall. Since Mario is still a bit away from the wall, it isn't, so again, nothing happens. Next, the first quarter step of movement happens, and because of Mario's high speed, he ends up here. But this situation's a bit more complex. You see, Mario isn't actually against a wall, but rather in the corner between two walls forming an obtuse angle. On top of that, the two walls happen to be processed in this order. So first, wall 1 is processed but Mario is beyond its hitbox and is unaffected. Then, wall 2 is processed and Mario gets pushed back perpendicularly to the wall. But because his angle is off by a small amount, he also moved towards wall 1 and is now inside its hitbox. But remember, wall 1 was already processed for this quarter step, so this collision goes undetected. On the next quarter step, the same process happens. He gets pushed back by wall 2 and inches further in wall 1. Repeat this over all 4 quarter steps and by the end of the frame, Mario is well inside of wall 1. Now, at the beginning of the next frame, the first thing that happens is a new collision check. This time, the game detects that Mario is in fact inside of wall 1 and so it pushes him out before anything else happens. and only then Mario's punch check is made, but now because of wall 1's angle, Mario is pushed away from wall 2 and his new position is again too far for the punch to connect. The exact same process is repeated for every frame of Mario's punch, and so even though he's right in front of it, he never hits the wall and gets to conserve his precious speed. Now Mario needs to climb up the room to reach the infinite stairs. To do that, he does a series of special wall kicks. When Mario bonks on a wall, he has 5 frames to perform a wall kick. His speed is also set to -16 on the next frame after his collision. If Mario times his wall kick perfectly on the first frame of the collision with the wall, he will be able to wall kick off of it before his speed is set to -16. When that happens, he gets to keep whatever speed he had. This is called the first frame wall kick or first D. However, when Mario jumps at the wall, he hits it on the very next frame, and since A was pressed to jump from the ground, it has to be released for 1 frame before it can be pressed again for the wall kick. This causes Mario to lose all of his precious speed. This is why the initial wall kick is pause buffered. By using the pause, Mario is able to jump on 2 consecutive frames and get around this problem. After that, every subsequent wall kick is done frame perfectly to keep all of his speed and jump up the room. That speed is enough to clip past the 70-star door and into the infinite stairs. Now, you may remember that Mario's vertical speed is a function of his horizontal speed when he does a single or a double jump. This is why he can jump up so high here. Because his horizontal speed is 315, he inherits 52 plus 1/4 of 315 or 130 vertical speed, then immediately loses force speed due to gravity. However, he does lose 20% of his forward speed as he jumps, and he drops down to 252. So how can he go up the supposedly infinite stairs like they're nothing? Well, the way the infinite stairs work in Super Mario 64 is a clever magic trick. In fact, the stairs are never infinite. What happens is that if you have fewer than 70 stars, there's an invisible barrier that warps Mario back by 410 units. Because of the way the stairs and the walls are set up, this creates the illusion that Mario didn't move, an illusion that's easily broken by using a different camera setting or a camera hack. This invisible barrier is right here. As you can see, it's not very big. It's only 154 units thick. So with a speed of 253 now, Mario is able to be in front of the barrier on 1 frame and beyond it on the next. And this is how he can reach the entrance to Bowser in the Sky with 0 stars. And that's it, everything else beyond this point you should already understand. I'll let the rest of this task play without interruptions. There's gonna be a few annotations to clarify some details, but you should already know everything you need to understand the rest. And there you have it, Super Mario 64 beaten in 4 minutes and 20 seconds thanks to all sorts of crazy tricks. I hope that with this knowledge you can now appreciate the work that was put into making this tool-assisted speedrun, and I hope that you learned a bit about how this beautiful game works. Thanks for watching!